Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. And let the echoes of ancient marble halls carry you far away. Tonight, we're not just telling history, we're drifting through the forgotten whispers of empires, where gods walked among men, and greatness slowly unraveled in silence. This is the story of ancient Greece. Before the fall. Long before empires rose and fell across continents, there was a place unlike any other. A land where myths lived beside mortals, where democracy first took root, and where ideas were forged that would shape the world for millennia. That place was Greece. But the story of ancient Greece isn't just one of triumph. It's also a story of hubris, division, and eventual decline. Before we explore its fall, we must first walk through its heights, through golden ages built on art, thought, war, and ambition. In the cradle of the Mediterranean, a civilization emerged from rocky coasts and sun-soaked islands. Ancient Greece wasn't a single empire, but a patchwork of fiercely independent city-states, known as polis. These cities, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and many more, each had their own government, laws, armies, and ways of life. Of all these, Athens stood as the heart of Greek brilliance. It was here, during the 5th century BCE, that philosophy, architecture, literature, and politics flourished like never before. Thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle posed questions that still echo in classrooms and debates today. Their inquiries into ethics, reason, and the nature of reality shaped not just Greece but the entire Western world. The Athenian experiment in democracy was a radical departure from monarchies and tyrannies. Citizens, not kings, would decide laws, pass judgment, and guide the city's fate. Though deeply flawed by today's standards, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners, it planted the first seeds of participatory governance. Meanwhile, across the Peloponnesian Peninsula, Sparta followed a very different path. A militaristic society. Spartan boys were trained from the age of 7 to fight, endure, and sacrifice. Discipline, obedience, and honor were their highest ideals. Unlike Athens, where art and the Persian Wars, 499,449 BCE, showed both the brilliance and the brittleness of the Greek world. When the mighty Persian Empire marched west to conquer Greece, city-states like Athens and Sparta momentarily set aside rivalries. United by a common enemy, they fought together in epic battles like Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. Against overwhelming odds, they emerged victorious, preserving their independence and inspiring G. But victory brought arrogance. Flush with pride, Athens formed the Delian-Legian alliance that gradually became an empire in all but name. Athens collected tribute. Sparta what? F.O. When Sparta finally emerged victorious, it ruled over a weakened, fractured Greece. The war had not brought peace, it had only ensured that no single power could ever truly unite the reg. Even in this time of turmoil, The Greeks never stopped creating. The theater of Euripides and Sophocles, the sculpted marbles of Phidias, and the dialogues of Plato continued to shape the world. But the spark of unity, outside of Greece, a new power was rising. In the north, the kingdom of Macedon, once dismissed as barbaric by southern Greeks, was gathering strength. Its ambitious king, Philip II, dreamed of uniting Greece not as a coalition, but under one rule. By the mid-4th century BCE, the classical age of Greece was ending. The cracks were now deep canyons, and foreign boots would soon march across the marble temples of Athens. But for one brief, shining moment, Greece had stood as the light of the ancient world, a civilization that dreamed, debated, and dared to define what it meant to be human. And it is from this golden summit that we now begin the long, slow descent into decline. The rise is over. The fall is near. The Peloponnesian War and the fracturing of Greece. Let your thoughts drift, like sails on a silent Aegean breeze, and imagine a time when cities turned against each other, not for survival but for pride. Tonight, we sail into the heart of Greece's greatest civil war, a conflict that began not with swords, but with suspicion. By the middle of the 5th century BCE, Greece was no longer united even by a common enemy. The Persian threat had receded into memory, and what remained was a nation of city-states, proud, powerful, and profoundly divided. At the center of the growing tension were two superpowers, Athens and Sparta. Their differences were not merely political, they were philosophical. Athens stood for democratic ideals, artistic achievement, and naval strength. Sparta was its opposite, a closed, militarized society that valued discipline over debate. After the Persian Wars, Athens began expanding its influence through the Delian League, a coalition of Greek city-states meant to continue the fight against Persia. But Athens transformed this alliance into an empire. It moved the League's treasury to the Parthenon, demanded tribute, and punished any city that tried to leave. Sparta, already wary of Athenian ambition, viewed these actions with alarm. Tensions finally erupted in 431 BCE. What followed was the Peloponnesian War, a 27-year struggle that would tear the Greek world apart. Sparta led the Peloponnesian League, a rival coalition of city-states. Athens commanded the sea. Sparta, the land. Each side believed itself to be the true guardian of Greek freedom. In the early years, neither side gained a decisive advantage. Pericles, the brilliant Athenian leader, urged a strategy of patience. Athens retreated behind its long walls, relying on its navy to bring in supplies. But then, the unimaginable happened. A plague struck Athens in 430 BCE. Trapped inside crowded walls, tens of thousands died, including Pericles himself. The city, once so orderly and proud, descended into panic and despair. Morality broke down. Faith in the gods withered. And still, the war dragged on. Meanwhile, Sparta continued its assaults on Athenian territory. The war became one of attrition year after year of raids, battles, and political upheaval. Leadership in Athens changed hands often. Democracy faltered. There were brief coups, tyrannies, and restorations. The very ideals Athens once stood for were eroding. In 415 BCE, Athens made a fateful decision, an invasion of Sicily. They believed conquering the wealthy city of Syracuse would restore their dominance. It was a bold plan, too bold. Led by the charismatic Alcibiades, the Sicilian expedition began with great enthusiasm. But Alcibiades was recalled to stand trial for sacrilege, defected to Sparta, and betrayed Athens. Without his leadership, the campaign fell into chaos. In 413 BCE, the entire Athenian force was annihilated. Ships burned, soldiers slaughtered or enslaved. It was the greatest military disaster in Athenian history. Sensing blood in the water, Sparta escalated the war. With Persian gold funding their new fleet, they challenged Athens at sea for the first time. City after city began to defect from the Delian League. Athens, once a proud empire, was now cornered. In 404 BCE, Sparta laid siege to Athens. With no food, no allies, and no hope, the Athenians surrendered. Their walls were torn down. Their empire was gone. Sparta had won, but Greece had lost. The war left the Greek world shattered. Once thriving cities were impoverished. Agriculture collapsed. Trade diminished. Thousands had died. And worst of all, trust between the city-states had been destroyed. Sparta tried to lead, but it lacked the diplomatic skill and economic base to rebuild Greece. Its harsh treatment of former allies only deepened resentment. Revolts flared up across the Aegean. Even Sparta's allies began turning against it. In the power vacuum, new players emerged: Thebes, Corinth, even Persia, each attempting to assert influence. Greece descended into a chaotic dance of shifting alliances, betrayals, and smaller wars. No longer united by glory or threatened by a common foe, the Greek city-states had become exhausted and divided. There was brilliance still, philosophy continued. Art endured, but politically, Greece was vulnerable. And far to the north, in the hills of Macedon, a young prince named Philip was watching, learning, waiting. But that is a story for another night. The rise of Macedon, Philip II, and the end of Greek independence. Drift with me now to a quieter corner of the ancient world. A place the proud cities of the south once dismissed. But from those quiet hills would rise a man. And with him, a storm. This is the story of how Greece lost its freedom, not in fire, but in footsteps, marching down from Macedon. For centuries, the city-states of southern Greece had looked down upon Macedon. To the refined citizens of Athens, it was a rugged backwater, a kingdom of brutes and shepherd kings. But Macedon had one great strength that the fractured Greek states had long lost: unity. In the mid-4th century BCE, a brilliant and ruthless leader emerged: Philip II of Macedon. He was no ordinary king. Educated in Thebes as a hostage in his youth, Philip had studied Greek politics, diplomacy, and warfare. He returned to his homeland with a clear vision: to modernize his army, consolidate power, and unite Greece not through alliance, but through conquest. Philip's genius lay in military reform. He built a professional standing army, introduced the deadly Macedonian phalanx with its long sarissa spears, and trained his men relentlessly. His cavalry was swift and disciplined, and his commanders fiercely loyal. No longer would Macedon be mocked. First, Philip secured his northern borders, defeating Illyrian tribes and asserting dominance over Thessaly. Then he began creeping south, city by city, either through diplomacy or force. He played Greek politics like a master, offering peace with one hand while sending troops with the other. The city-states, still weakened from the Peloponnesian War, were too divided to resist effectively. Athens, Sparta, and Thebes bickered and hesitated. When Philip moved in, he often met little resistance. Yet not all Greeks were blind to the threat. In Athens, a statesman named Demosthenes warned passionately of Philip's ambitions. His fiery speeches, known as the Philippics, rang through the assembly. He called for unity, for a stand, for action. But his words often fell on tired ears. In 338 BCE, the moment of reckoning arrived. A coalition of Athens and Thebes finally confronted Philip at the Battle of Chaeronea. It was their last chance to stop him. But Philip's army, with his teenage son Alexander commanding one wing, crushed the Allied forces. It was not just a victory. It was a death knell for Greek independence. Philip, now the undisputed master of Greece, formed the League of Corinth, a federation of city-states under his leadership. Publicly, it was a call for unity. Privately, it was submission. The states could keep their laws and governments, but real power rested with Philip. He promised to lead a pan-Hellenic war against Persia, a dream that had always stirred the Greek imagination. Finally, the old enemy would be confronted again. Not by divided cities, but by a united Greece. But before he could launch the campaign, Philip was struck down, assassinated in 336 BCE during a festival in Aegae. The motives remain mysterious: political enemies, personal revenge, perhaps even family intrigue. His death shocked the world. But his dream did not die with him. His son, Alexander, would take it further than Philip had ever imagined. And Greece, once the land of free city-states, had become the launching pad for an empire. The rise of Macedon under Philip marked the end of an era. No longer would Athens, Sparta, or Thebes stand as independent powers. Their fate had been sealed not by a foreign invader, but by one of their own, one who learned their games, mastered their tactics, and turned their disunity against them. It is a strange irony of history that the land which gave birth to democracy, philosophy, and political thought would lose its freedom to a kingdom it once mocked. Yet even in defeat, Greek culture did not die. In fact, under Macedonian rule, it would spread farther than ever before. But the age of the city-state was over. The streets of Athens would still echo with debate, but the decisions would come from far away. A single crown now cast a shadow over the marble columns of Greece. And the winds of empire had begun to blow. Alexander the Great glory and exhaustion. Close your eyes. And let the stars of ancient Persia and Egypt shimmer in your mind. Imagine a young man with the blood of kings and the fire of gods, setting out to conquer the world not with armies alone, but with vision. This is the tale of Alexander, whose rise was as swift as it was blinding. At just 20 years old, Alexander III of Macedon became king after his father Philip's sudden death. Many doubted the boy king. He was young, untested, and surrounded by powerful enemies. But within months, Alexander crushed internal revolts, secured his rule, and reminded the Greek city-states who held the reins. Then, he looked east toward Persia, the vast empire that had once threatened Greece but now stood weakened by internal conflict. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with around 40,000 men. He brought not just soldiers, but engineers, scribes, geographers, and philosophers. This was not merely a conquest. It was an expedition to change the world. At Granicus, his army met Persian satraps and defeated them. At Issus, he confronted Darius III, the great king of Persia, and routed his massive forces. Alexander was relentless, strategic, and inspiring. He led from the front, his armor gleaming, his spirit unshaken. But Alexander wasn't only a warrior. In Egypt, he was hailed as a liberator and declared a god. There, he founded the city of Alexandria, which would become a beacon of knowledge for centuries. Then came the decisive moment, the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Though outnumbered, Alexander's forces shattered Darius's army. The Persian king fled, and Alexander marched into Babylon, Persepolis, and Susa, the very heart of the Persian Empire. He had done what no Greek had ever imagined. The boy from Macedon now ruled an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Afghanistan. But glory has a cost. The farther Alexander went, the more distant he grew from his homeland, from his men, and perhaps even from himself. He began adopting Persian customs, wearing their robes, appointing foreign advisors. Many Greeks and Macedonians resented this. They had come to conquer, not to be transformed. Alexander claimed he was not just king but divine. He demanded worship, even from his old companions. His paranoia grew. He executed close friends over rumors of betrayal. The journey, once filled with purpose, became an endless march into unfamiliar lands. In 327 BCE, he entered India. There, he faced fierce resistance and elephants in battle at the Hydaspes River. He won again. But now his men, exhausted and homesick, refused to go farther. After years of campaign, they demanded to return west. Alexander, heartbroken but understanding, finally agreed. The return journey was brutal. Through the Gedrosian desert, many died from thirst and heat. The empire, though vast, was fragile. Revolts flared. Administrators failed. In Babylon, in 323 BCE, Alexander fell ill. Fever consumed him. Within days, the man who had never lost a battle, who dreamed of conquering the edges of the earth, was gone. He died at just 32 years old. His body did not rot. Some said it was a sign of his divinity. Others believed the earth itself held its breath. But his empire, glorious and golden, could not survive him. Alexander left no clear heir. His generals, known as the Diadochi, fought for control. What followed was not unity, but chaos. The empire splintered into kingdoms. Civil wars raged. Greek influence spread. Yes, but so too did bloodshed. And Greece? It remained under the shadow of Macedonian power. The dream of city-state independence was gone. Athens was no longer the heart of the world, but a proud relic beneath larger crowns. Alexander's conquests brought Greek culture to Asia, and Eastern ideas back to the West. Cities, libraries, and academies sprang up in his name. But his ambition also revealed a truth: empires built on glory are often buried in exhaustion. He had conquered the known world, yet never ruled it in peace. Still, the name Alexander echoed across centuries. To Romans, he was the ideal general. To medieval kings, the ultimate model of courage. To philosophers, a warning of unchecked ambition. And to us, perhaps, he is a reminder of how even the brightest flames can burn out before their time. So sleep now, dear listener, under the same stars that once guided his march. For tomorrow, we'll see what happened after the flame faded and how Greece slipped further from its golden past. The Hellenistic world division, blending, and decline. Tonight, we drift into a strange and beautiful twilight, the age after greatness. When empires shimmer but begin to blur. Where Greek and Eastern worlds met not with spears, but with ideas. This is the story of the Hellenistic world, born from conquest, fading into memory. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, he left behind the largest empire the world had ever seen and no clear successor. His infant son was too young, and his generals, loyal in battle but hungry for power, turned on each other. What followed was decades of chaos, known as the Wars of the Diadochi. Alexander's generals carved up the empire like scavengers at a feast. Ptolemy took Egypt. Seleucus claimed Persia and the East. Antigonus fought for control of Asia Minor and Macedon. Each styled himself a king. Each built his own dynasty. And Greece itself, once the source of all this glory, became a pawn in their wars. The world that emerged from this fragmentation was called the Hellenistic Aegea, term that means Greek-like. It was an age of cultural fusion. Greek language, art, architecture, and philosophy spread across the Middle East and North Africa, blending with local traditions. Temples stood beside ziggurats. Statues of Zeus shared space with Egyptian gods. Greek became the language of diplomacy, science, and trade from the Nile to the Indus. Cities flourished. Alexandria in Egypt became the jewel of the Mediterranean, a city of libraries, scholars, and marvels. Its famed Library of Alexandria sought to collect all the knowledge of the world. Scientists like Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference. Physicians made new discoveries. Poets composed verses that echoed across generations. But beneath this intellectual golden glow lay instability. The Diadochi kingdoms were powerful, but never truly at peace. They were often locked in conflict, draining their treasuries and devastating their lands. Greece itself, now outside the main centers of power, suffered under constant intervention. The once independent city-states had become pawns in a larger game. Some allied with Macedonia. Others resisted. Rebellions flared. Alliances shifted. But none could restore the autonomy of the classical era. Meanwhile, a quiet storm was brewing to the west. Rome, a small republic across the Adriatic Sea, had begun expanding first in Italy, then into the wider Mediterranean. At first, the Hellenistic kingdoms ignored them. Rome was distant, provincial, unimportant. But Rome was patient. In 197 BCE, during the Second Macedonian War, Roman legions crossed into Greece. They claimed to be liberators, freeing the Greeks from Macedonian kings. In truth, they were setting the stage for dominance. The decisive moment came in 168 BCE at the Battle of Pydna. There, the once feared Macedonian phalanx was crushed by Roman flexibility and discipline. Macedon fell. By 146 BCE, after crushing a Greek revolt in Corinth, Rome declared Greece a province of its empire. The temples still stood. The theaters still held plays. But now Roman governors ruled from atop the marble steps. The dream was over. The Hellenistic world, born from the ashes of Alexander's ambition, had lasted barely 2 centuries. In that time, it brought unmatched cultural blending, scientific progress, and artistic achievement. But it was never truly stable. Its roots were conquest, not cooperation. Even as Rome absorbed the region, Greek influence remained powerful. The Romans admired Greek thought, studied its philosophy, and worshipped its gods under Latin names. To many Roman elites, being civilized meant being Hellenized. Yet for Greece itself, the Hellenistic period was a long, slow surrender. The spirit of the city-state, the agora, the citizen assembly, the fierce independence had been replaced with dynasties and decrees. Still, the legacy of this age endures. In every column of a modern courthouse, in the logic of every philosophical argument, in the geometry of every classroom there echoes a whisper of the Hellenistic mind. It was not just a time of kings and wars. It was a time of thinkers and builders, of poets and scientists, of curiosity and complexity. So rest now, and remember that even in decline, greatness can leave a glow like the sun setting over marble ruins. The age of empires may have passed, but the ideas they carried would light the world long after the torches were extinguished. Roman rule and the final eclipse of Greece. The stars over Greece have dimmed. Not because they vanished but because a newer empire now casts its shadow across the land. Tonight, we walk among the quiet ruins, where philosophers once debated, and where Roman sandals now echo through empty agoras. This is the story of how Greece, once the teacher of the world, became its silent classroom. After centuries of brilliance, warfare, and empire building, Greece had lost its independence not in a single glorious battle, but through gradual surrender to a new power rising from the west. By 146 BCE, Rome had formally annexed Greece. Corinth was burned. Macedon was reduced to a Roman province. Athens, though spared physical destruction, was no longer sovereign. To the Romans, the conquest was strategic. To the Greeks, it was tragic. Yet the irony lay in what followed. Though Rome ruled, it was Greece that truly taught. Roman generals sent their sons to Athens to study philosophy and rhetoric. They admired Homer as if he were their own. They adopted Greek architecture, Greek sculpture, Greek drama, even Greek religion, under different names. Zeus became Jupiter, Hermes, Mercury, Aphrodite, Venus. And so began a strange and quiet phase of Greek history: cultural supremacy under political submission. Athens transformed from a center of power into a kind of university city. Stoics preached from painted porches. Epicureans debated in gardens. Theaters still echoed with tragedy and comedy. But no decisions were made in the assembly anymore. Authority rested in Roman hands. The city-states, now devoid of real autonomy, became showpieces of the classical world. Tourists from Rome visited temples, bought souvenirs, and listened to lectures. Greek cities grew quieter, older, more ornamental. Their citizens were subjects no off Roman law, Roman taxes, Roman roads. Still, pockets of resistance flared. In 88 BCE, during the First Mithridatic War, the Greek cities allied with Mithridates VI of Pontus, a defiant Eastern king who challenged Roman dominance. Athens, driven by nationalist hope, expelled its Roman officials and declared rebellion. Rome responded with ruthless force. The general Sulla besieged Athens, starving it into submission. When he entered the city in 86 BCE, he allowed his troops to plunder. Blood soaked the marble steps of the Acropolis. It was a violent reminder: Roman tolerance had limits. Afterward, Rome tightened its grip. Greece became part of the Roman province of Achaia. Governors were appointed from Rome. Local leaders had little real power. Infrastructure improved: roads, aqueducts, ports, but the spirit of independence had faded. And yet, Greece adapted, rather than resist. Many Greek intellectuals collaborated. They tutored Roman aristocrats. They wrote histories. They interpreted the old myths through new lenses. The playwright Menander, the biographer Plutarch, the geographer Strabothes' voices shaped how the ancient world was remembered. In this fusion, a new Greco-Roman identity was born. Greek culture gave Rome elegance. Rome gave Greece stability. It was not equality, but it was endurance. In the Eastern Roman Empire, often called the Byzantine Empire, Greek became the official language. Christianity, which took root during Roman times, found a rich philosophical foundation in Greek logic and ethics. The New Testament was written in Greek. Church councils were held in Greek cities. Though politically diminished, Greece had become a spiritual and cultural artery for a new world. But the classical Greece, the world of hoplites, orators, and citizen assemblies, was gone. Its temples remained. Its words lived on. But the people no longer ruled themselves. Over time, invasions, earthquakes, and economic decline wore down the once great cities. Some were abandoned. Others became provincial outposts. Ruins became grazing land. Statues were toppled and buried. And yet, travelers from across centuries would come, look upon these fallen stones, and feel something stir. A memory. A reverence. A sense that here, once, people dreamed bigger than kingdoms. Greece had not vanished. It had transformed. From empire to classroom. From ruler to inspiration. By the 4th century CE, the Western Roman Empire was collapsing. But in the East, from Constantinople, the legacy of Greece would live on. And centuries later, during the Renaissance, the world would rediscover the old texts, the old ideas, and breathe life into them again. So the eclipse was never total. It was simply a long, thoughtful night before dawn. Legacy and revival: how Greece shaped the modern world. Now, as we leave behind the ruins and shadows, let's turn toward the light they cast. Because even in silence, Greece never truly disappeared. Tonight, we trace the echoes from the broken marble of the past to the foundations of the modern world. The fall of ancient Greece wasn't an ending, it was a transformation. Though its city-states faded, its ideas did not. Long after its armies marched and its temples crumbled, Greece lived on in minds, manuscripts, and memory. The legacy of Greece is woven into the very fabric of modern civilization. In art, politics, language, science, philosophy, even in how we tea. When the Roman Empire adopted and adapted Greek culture, it ensured that the legacy wabi, pr, b. It wasn't until the Renaissance, 1,000 years after the fall of classical Greece, that the world rediscovered the brilliance of its past. In Italy, scholars hunted for lost Greek texts. When the Ottomans captured Constantinople in 1453, many Greek scholars fled west, carrying ancient knowledge with them. This great migration of minds helped ignite a fire in European curiosity, science, humanism, and art. The works of Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Hippocrates, and Herodotus became essential once again. They influenced thinkers like Galileo, Newton, Machiavelli, and Descartes. Greek logic became the foundation of Western reason. But it wasn't just knowledge that survived. It was ideals. The concept of democracy, Born in the noisy assemblies of Athens. Inspired revolution centuries later. In 1776. The founders of the United States looked to Greece when they built their republic. Thomas Jefferson admired Greek architecture and thought. The Capitol in Washington, D.C., with its white columns and domed roof, echoes the Parthenon. In France, the ideals of liberté, égalité, and fraternité were sparked by the same ancient notions of civic freedom and public voice. Even in modern philosophy, ethics, and politics, the Socratic method asking questions to reach truth remains foundational in education and debate. Greece didn't just survive in theory. In the 19th century, after centuries of Ottoman rule, the people of Greece fought for their independence. Inspired by their ancestors, they reclaimed their identity. Modern Greece was born in 1830. Once again speaking the language of Plato and Sophocles. Travelers, writers, and artists came from all over Europe to witness the rebirth of a nation that had once lit the world. Lord Byron, the English poet, even died in Greece, fighting for its freedom. Today, Greece stands as a bridge between East and West, between past and present. Its monuments draw millions, not just because they are old, but because they still speak. They tell stories of what humans can imagine, build, question, and preserve. When we say, the fall of Greece, we often picture ruins. But in truth, those ruins became roots for something far larger, far more enduring. Every time we speak of justice, beauty, freedom, logic, virtue, or truth, we are speaking the language Greece taught us. So as we close this story, know that it is not a tragedy. It is a cycle. Civilizations rise and fall. But ideas, when they are strong enough, rise again. In new minds, new lands, new forms. And Greece, perhaps more than any other civilization, reminds us that even in silence, greatness endures. Let that be the final whisper tonight. The world may have changed, but the mind that dares to question, to create, to dream, that is forever Greek. If this journey through ancient Greece stirred your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves stories of history, wisdom, and legacy. Because history isn't just about the past, it's about the ideas that keep returning.